But I think when I think of some of the viral campaigns that we've had in the last couple of years, there's really two parts of marketing that I think we should consider here. There's the brand marketing and then there's the performance marketing. And for a lot of our viral campaigns that we've done, it originates with the brand marketing side. How can we stay true to our DNA, make people laugh, and just have them enjoy their day when they're scrolling TikTok or Instagram and they happen to see our brand come across. And then leveraging performance marketing on top of that to almost amplify that campaign. We get a lot of earned media from our viral stunts too. So whether it's, press releases or just people on TikTok seeing it, views, impressions, that's all stuff that we're tracking. And then when we think of performance media, that's almost like, how can we keep the campaign alive for a little bit longer? So then we'll use different cut downs of assets or videos, go run those on, programmatic display networks or use them in search ads where we can. So I think that's one of the biggest things is just balancing brand marketing and performance marketing, because I think if a marketer says, hey, I have $10,000 to spend next month to support a campaign, usually that, like, you're already leading with performance marketing. How can you almost lead with the kind of free brand marketing and then use performance to support that? I think that's the best way to approach it.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is our sixth Ask Me Anything session. And today we have a very, very, very special guest, Natalie, with us. She's an experienced e-commerce leader who has worked across retail, agencies, and brands. She started her career with working at Walmart.com, then helped global brands grow at Stackline, and later led digital strategies and media strategy at Liquid Death, which is something that I think a lot of people here are excited to hear about. And today she advises early stage brands on Amazon, DTC, omnichannel growth, and social commerce. A very warm welcome, Natalie. Thank you for agreeing to joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I recognize a few familiar faces on here. If we haven't met officially one-on-one, would love to chat, so reach out.
Amazing, guys. So, like how we do in our other sessions, we'll keep it very straightforward. We have a bunch of questions already with us prepared for Natalie, which were submitted by our audience from the community and people who have registered. So we'll go through it one by one. And if we have time towards the end of session, which I am being brutally honest, which we don't have usually, but feel free to put up your questions on chat and maybe Natalie can cover them in the community as well. So let's begin. I'm super excited. Natalie, before we begin, like a couple of lines about you to make our audience excited about your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say you gave a really great background on some of my, more tactical career things. I think peeling the onion back another layer, I really love startup brands. So, when I joined Stackline, I was early on there around 30, number 30 or 40. When I joined Liquid Death, was earlier-ish on there. I believe we were just closing our series C or D at the point that I came on. So I love the idea of startup brands. And as you alluded to a little bit, I recently pivoted away from Liquid Death. So they're still a client of mine. I work with them very closely every day. But I also have a set of other brands that I work with. And really my focus with them is a lot of them are really just kind of getting going. What are the foundational elements of e-commerce that's really important for them? For some clients, it's helping build up their Shopify. For other clients, it's expanding them to marketplaces. Some of them, it's a retail media strategy. And so I think what's been really exciting is just being back on the cusp of the startup ecosystem and being able to help brands, get going faster within e-commerce. So that's kind of where my skill set is going in the future.
This is amazing, Natalie. And, like one question before we begin our official AMA would be, what made you choose e-commerce as your choice of career? What excited you the most?
So I love that question because when I went to college, I studied biochemistry, and it's really funny to think, my most recent professional gig was selling water online. So I went from formulating with chemicals to selling water across the country. And so I've learned a lot about myself along the way and kind of where I've wanted to go. I did not think e-commerce was going to be a landing place necessarily. However, something that's really shaped who I am as a professional is my family. So they started a business in the late 90s. My mom was actually selling soap supplies and personal cosmetic products online. She started just selling her own things at craft shows. It was mostly finished soap. And so I remember, making soap with her in the kitchen, and the business really took off, and they, acquired the mold manufacturer, and they acquired the soap maker, and they or the soap manufacturing process. And then they also, would have other products that people could use to formulate soap. So, she could help you buy the sparkles, the packaging, the fragrance, sort of all those things. And she ended up becoming this, middleman manufacturer to help other women actually go on and start their own cosmetic companies. It really was an awesome business that my mom built, and the business is still out today. She did exit, though, about 5 years ago. They sold it off to private equity, and they exited. But at that point, I thought maybe one day I would take over the family business, but that's kind of why I actually originated in biochemistry, because I thought, okay, I can help do the formulation side. But what I learned, and I'm sure a lot of the other ladies on this call have learned, like, what you like to do and what you want to do professionally can kind of be two different things. And I love to formulate cosmetic products, but I didn't want to be a lab rat on a lab bench all day. So that's kind of where I started to pivot into e-commerce.
This is super interesting, like this made me feel that you have e-commerce in your blood, it came from amazing, Natalie. The first question that I'm going to pick up is actually an extension to the one that I asked, which is, like, if someone is to set up a digital retail team today, a very strong team, just like you did in your stints, and also you're doing it currently with different brands, how does it look today versus how did it look 3 years back?
It's a really great question. It's interesting to see the evolution of just e-commerce in general. If we think back 20 years ago, it was, you had a person that called on Walmart and called on Target, and it was so much focused on relationship cultivating. You'd wine and dine Target in Minneapolis, and you would hope that they would give you shelf space or expand your shelf space. But that's really changed a lot in the last 10 to 15 years. And so I think data is super important as we think about building retail teams and then leveraging software to make your job just more efficient. I have one client that I work with. It's a really lean team, and we've been able to sort of set up the software infrastructure to help us do more with less. And I think that's going to be a big thing going forward too, is just how can teams do more with less? Where we think of, a time several years ago where maybe an Amazon team at a CPG company, they might have had a team of, 5 to 10 people. Whereas today we're seeing, you actually don't need that many people to get the same job done, especially I'm sure we all use ChatGPT on a daily basis to help us do some basic things. And so it's finding that middle ground on what infrastructure works best for you as a team and what you can help do more with less, financially and headcount wise. Another interesting thing that I've noticed in my career is just digital retail. Sometimes it falls under marketing, sometimes it falls under sales. And, I think all of us as digital marketers, we have to have a little bit of a skill set of both, and really understanding, knowing a little bit about a lot of things sometimes, and being able to go deep when you need to. And so for me, I've known, hey, I'm not great with this specific set of things. How can I go find software to help me, go find a consultant that can help me, an agency? And so knowing that when I need to go deep on something, if I need that support, how can I find it in a way that's going to help me, again, do more with less, but also move the needle in that regard.
Amazing, Natalie. And how big was your team when you were at Liquid Death?
Yeah, so my team at Liquid Death, again, was very nimble. So we had 3 people that were on my team. One was a paid search manager, one was a paid programmatic manager, and the search gal, she oversaw social ads, any ad you would find on Amazon, Google, and then the programmatic manager, he did CTV, as well as just the general display ads. And then we had another guy on the team who was our content manager. So again, really small, nimble team, but we we got the job done. And I think what was really exciting too is that because we didn't have this big team, we were able to kind of learn a lot. And so, even our content manager, she did content across the entire internet. And so she was able to understand the processes, how they were different for Amazon versus Instacart, and then even supporting the brick and mortar team too with their digital product pages. So yeah, I think it worked really well for us as a team. But also too, you have to hire the right people who can support that infrastructure too. You need people that are gritty and willing to learn. And I think a lot of us now in e-commerce, and I'm sure a lot of the ladies on this call, e-commerce hasn't been around for that long. So we've all in a way had to have been, gritty over the last several years to even get to where we are today.
Yeah. So how did you manage to hire such a great content manager who was, because it's not an easy job, Natalie, you have to stand out, and especially for a brand like Liquid Death, like every word that goes out matters. So how did you manage to hire such a rock star content manager, and what are like few tips that the ladies who are here have joined us should take care of?
Got lucky, first and foremost. It's funny when, Liquid Death is such a special company, and I think has been on a lot of people's radar for the last couple of years. And so when we think about just the sheer influx of interest that we get from various people for that type of role, it was an entry-level role. So we were, and that's hard to read through too, because sometimes someone gets lucky with the right internship and they have a cool experience with a big CPG company or with a retailer. But, I think the best thing that we did with that hire was we were just looking for someone who had a general interest in e-commerce, but was really hungry, willing to step up, really willing to raise their hand and go, beyond expectations. And so what that ultimately did is she helped me do my job better. And honestly, I look back when I was at her point in my career, like she is way out exceeding even, I think, what I was doing at that point. And so I think always building a team of people that are on a track to be better than you because they can challenge you to also be better. And so part of it's luck. I also am a firm believer in case studies for interviews because I think that says a lot about people, even though I know we've all interviewed and probably had to do case studies and they can kind of suck, but they do say a lot about the people that you're hiring. Most notably, some people just don't want to do them at all. And then they kind of weed themselves out, which makes your pile a lot smaller.
That's actually a good point, because that also invariably tells you that how much hard work he or she is, ready to put in to take up this job. So that definitely matters. Coming to my next question, Natalie, what's, or we can take example of Liquid Net again, like what were your North Star matrices across digital retail, and also especially, the nimble team that you mentioned, because it's super difficult, complicated task across channels. So what was that one North Star metric or the set of North Star metric that you were taking care of?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think especially too, as you think of like what life stage you are or at a company, if you're super early on, maybe contribution margin isn't as important because you're trying to reinvest a lot of your cash flow back into your marketing spend. So I think first and foremost, it depends what stage of the company you're in. Because I can tell you, when I've joined really early stage and they're spending smaller on advertising spend, their ROAS looks incredible. Just because, they're getting going, they maybe have some viral nature, they're getting some organic traffic. So depending on the business, like you can have, if you're just looking at ROAS, it can look really darn good. And I think we all know too, if you're just spending on branded terms, of course your ROAS is going to be inflated. So I think first and foremost, where are you in the life stage of your company, and how can you start to think about, yes, sales are always going to be important. But I think one of the metrics that I really like to keep a pulse on is gross margin to contribution margin as a percentage and as a dollar, as a dollar figure, and kind of understanding how that grows with the life of your company. And so, when I think of like working at Liquid Death, just understanding how that changes over time and how those benchmarks can potentially change, I think was really transformative. But then in addition to, just being able to be open-minded, because, I have another client that they sell products that are a premium price point. And so for them, they innately, their profit margin structure is a little bit different. But in addition, their sourcing is different too, because it's domestic. So just like we were talking about with the tariffs, they're not going to be as impacted. So and I think every business is different, sales, ROAS, but then I do think gross margin to contribution margin, really understanding what's happening in there can say a lot about a business.
Yeah, makes sense, Natalie. And what like how do you think about someone who's just starting up and just let us assume that they're bootstrapping this business that they're starting up. And for those folks, like how much do you think they should focus on growth versus like balancing their P&L and make sure that there's not a lot of things that they're burning up. And also, one thing that always goes into the mind that what is enough, like is my growth
Yeah.
investment that I have done, is it enough or should I invest more? I'm leaving money on the table. How should they see things when they're starting up?
Yeah. And I think another thing too, when you think about just how much do you need to get going, working kind of with some startup brands now, it is interesting. Some of them are in the fundraising stage and, or they've just kind of closed some rounds and knowing, okay, first of all, how much do I need to fundraise if I'm early stage? And I think always as, entrepreneurs, and I've started my own companies too in the past, but as entrepreneurs, we're very timid. We don't want to ask for too much. We want to do more with less. So I think first and foremost, ask for more than you think, even after you do all the modeling and, hey, I think with this marketing efficiency ratio, I can get to X. So one, always give yourself buffer there because early on things are going to happen that you're not going to be able to come to see that sort of come to fruition. But then I think with those companies that do have maybe a track record with some sales insight or just maybe they've deployed some ad dollars, I think one metric that I always like to lean into is TROAS or total return on ad spend, which is just your total retail sales divided by your ad spend. And I think that's really telling because a lot of times we'll invest $1 in ad spend, and that person will come back and subscribe and save. Maybe they buy right there from viewing my ad, and then they go on and purchase. They go on subscribe and save, and they buy for 3 more months. And so, that's not captured in your ROAS figure that you have in that specific campaign. However, rising tides lift all boats. As your paid sales rise, usually your organic sales rise. So I do think TROAS is a really good metric to lean into, especially in planning. So if you're a brand and you're like, hey, I want to hit $5,000 next month on Amazon, just doing some back of the envelope math. Okay, so I think I can hit a $6 TROAS, and then you just do the algebra and you get your ad spend where you think you need to be. And then longer term too, if you're looking at full year planning or out year planning, I think that can be a really good indicator on just simply planning for your business. And then every month as you go deploy those dollars, make sure you're hitting those benchmarks. And if you're not, maybe you pivot, and instead of putting that money into advertising, maybe you put it into promotions, or you pivot from Amazon ads and you go run a meta campaign that's driving back to Amazon, or doing something a little bit more creative in that aspect.
Yeah, absolutely, Natalie. And like when it comes to bigger brands, again, we can take example of Liquid Death. It's always a pressure of every campaign should go viral, and I'm pretty sure from a digital strategies as well, things might depend a lot on how campaign goes out and from its virality. So how did you used to plan, and like what kind of mindset you were able to deploy in your teammates and people that you hired in terms of, okay, like every campaign has to be special and XYZ are the things that we need to be taken care of? Just feel that.
Yeah, it's a great point. And the thing I want to preface it with is at Liquid Death, all of our creative content came from the top. Mike, our CEO and founder, he is just a creative visionary unlike anyone I've ever met. Our in-house creative team is incredible at bringing, his thoughts or, just other marketing ideas to life. And I've truly never seen anything like it in my career. And, I've done some different speaking engagements and talked to people at conferences, and they're like, hey, I work for XYZ CPG company. How can I do the same thing? And the one thing that I think is held true for us is it comes from the top. Whereas, some various corporate companies, they have a little bit more red tape. They can't do edgier things like we've been able to do with Liquid Death, just because it's so core to our brand. And again, it comes from the top. But I think when I think of some of the viral campaigns that we've had in the last couple of years, there's really two parts of marketing that I think we should consider here. There's the brand marketing and then there's the performance marketing. And for a lot of our viral campaigns that we've done, it originates with the brand marketing side. How can we stay true to our DNA, make people laugh, and just have them enjoy their day when they're scrolling TikTok or Instagram and they happen to see our brand come across. And then leveraging performance marketing on top of that to almost amplify that campaign. We get a lot of earned media from our viral stunts too. So whether it's, press releases or just people on TikTok seeing it, views, impressions, that's all stuff that we're tracking. And then we think of performance media, that's almost like, how can we keep the campaign alive for a little bit longer? So then we'll use different cut downs of assets or videos, go run those on, programmatic display networks, or use them in search ads where we can. So I think that's one of the biggest things, is just balancing brand marketing and performance marketing, because I think if a marketer says, hey, I have $10,000 to spend next month to support a campaign, usually that, like, you're already leading with performance marketing. How can you almost lead with the kind of free brand marketing and then use performance to support that? I think that's the best way to approach it.
Makes sense, Natalie. That gets me to our next question. What is one strategy which works every time for customer retention when churning is the biggest defeat for any digital D2C brand? And that we all would agree.
Yeah. So 2 examples come to mind with that one. I think first and foremost, in the CPG or just any world where we're going to have repeat customers, could be anything from paper towels to water to, our favorite protein bars that we buy every month. I think subscription is a huge, huge piece of the CPG business, especially in a world where a lot of CPG brands don't have direct-to-consumer websites. And so when we think about revenue, just being able to lock that in before it even happens, or without that consumer having to think that they have to come back and buy again, is really, really powerful. And I've seen for some of the various brands that I've worked with, sometimes, subscribe and save on Amazon can be as much as 20 to 50% of their total business on Amazon. And that's huge. I think though, with saying subscribe and save, or even if you have subscription on your D2C website, in the same breath, I think it's really important to also pay attention to the new to brand, because if you only double down in getting those repeat people into your ecosystem, you're never getting new eyeballs on your brand. You're not driving the awareness for your brand. I think you need a multi step of the funnel strategy in that regard. And I think, there's another client that I'm currently working with. They sell fabulous crafting products. And once they get someone in their ecosystem, they are like a diehard. It is crazy. They'll acquire someone, and through email marketing or just retargeting, they spend $20 on their first order, and they come back and spend, hundreds within the subsequent months. And so it's really interesting how they've been able to nail that retention strategy. And now I'm working with them more so on expanding that top of the funnel. So how can we go to market at the different marketplaces? How can we have a TikTok shop and be available through social commerce, and just testing and learning a lot of those channels too. But to answer your original question, I think subscription is a really, really fascinating thing to dig into, especially for those CPG brands with a highly repeatable type purchase.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. And, this, got me a thought which would take another session for you to answer us, was, I am pretty sure there's a thin line between being, spammy, once someone enters funnel, versus, being subtle and, making sure that this loyalty, gets built. So just your one-liner, Natalie, what do you think, how do we draw that fine line between these two?
Yeah, it's a really great point. I'm sure we've all unsubscribed to text messages that we've gotten, or emails that just get auto sorted into our promotions tab. So yeah, I think making sure that you're sharing information that's going to be compelling to them is first and foremost. And so, when is that thoughtful moment on when you reach out to someone because they've abandoned their cart? How do you know when to reach out to someone to buy again? Because chances are they're in a cycle again where they've depleted all the product that you sent them and they're ready to buy again because it's a consumable product, or maybe they've crafted something and they're ready to make their next project. So yeah, I think finding that fine balance is super important. And I think, keeping an eye on the unsubscribes is a key indicator. I think understanding if you can put your customers into different cohorts and understand maybe the high engagers or your super loyalists that spend a lot with the brand, maybe they want to hear from you every week. However, those may be people that come and buy once a quarter or even once a year. Maybe they only want to hear what you have to say quarterly or monthly. And I think understanding where those customers lie cohort wise will really start to paint that picture. And I think it's really fun too when you can build these personas for those individuals internally, so that hey, this is a Julie and here's how we're targeting Julie, or hey, this is Joe and here's how we're targeting Joe, and this is what we're trying to build a relationship with Joe. Maybe Joe prefers SMS over email. And really just starting to personify those cohorts can help you build that relationship in a meaningful way for them without having to do it on an exact one-to-one level.
Yeah, and this is super important for any brand. Like this is the point where you break or make a relationship with your loyal customers. Absolutely, Natalie. And this brings me to my last question, which is, I think, the most favorite question for everyone here, which is one piece of advice, Natalie, that you would like to give to all the women who have joined us, and also people who are just starting up, are just trying to become those budding entrepreneurs and see those large dreams of someday owning a brand that becomes as large as Liquid Death. What would be that piece of advice?
Oh, that's a great question. I've learned a lot of what not to do. Not necessarily, I feel like I'm still trying to learn what I want to do when I grow up, which is part of the excitement of all of it. But no, I'm just kidding. I think for me, just being generally curious has always led me kind of to my next thing, or even working for a company, just being curious about, hey, I own the digital business, but what's going on in brick and mortar? And how are you approaching that business? And how can we take learnings from your business and apply that to digital? And not doing it in a way where you're stepping on toes, but doing it from a pure place of curiosity. And I think alongside that too, all of the people that I've ever worked with on my teams, I've always tried to build a really, personal relationship first and then professional relationship second. And I think for me, that's taken me really far when it comes to the late nights where your product page got shut down by Amazon and how do we get it back up? And because I've built relationships with some of these people, working late with them to grind it out together has definitely taken me way further. So I would say one, just innate curiosity. I also think just understanding different viewpoints has been really helpful too, because e-commerce is changing so fast. And if we were going by the playbook of what was 5 years ago, we would already be out of date. And so I think staying on that cutting edge, staying very curious, and then also just, building those personal relationships first and foremost with your team are super important.
100% agreed. Relationships take you, wherever you want to go. And at each stage of your life, different kind of people will come help you out, especially, people whom you feel that maybe, like this is something, a far-fetched relationship, but you don't know, you connect those dots and eventually lead to a path, which takes you places. This was great, Natalie. And since you mentioned relationships, guys who are not part of our community yet, we run a women-led community, Roaring Ladies of E-commerce. There's a link on the chat box. Feel free to join it. Would be more than happy to have you there. And we have Natalie as well, part of our community. So if you have any follow-on questions, go ahead and ping her. Thank you so much, Natalie, for joining us today and giving us your time.
Absolutely. Thank you. And yeah, excited to get to meet some of you fabulous ladies too.
Absolutely. Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care.
Have a good one. Bye.